Hey there, nation, and welcome to the show. We help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and welcome to the episode of Cheap Shots. This series dedicated to showing you money-saving tips on the wargaming hobby. And on today's episode, we will show you how to quickly and, more importantly, cheaply paint a swarm of Malstrain Genestealers for your games of Necromunda. We will paint these miniatures to a beautiful tabletop standard, and by using the techniques and the materials that we suggest, we will help you save over $114.87 at exactly the same time. As you can see in this picture, this is what the end result will look like for your Malstrain Genestealers. And like I said before, we'll be using a handful of really cheap craft paints that you can get at Walmart, some spray paint that you can also get from the very same place. We'll also look for some really cheaper alternatives to some name brand paint materials that many people use to paint their miniatures and help you guys to get your miniatures painted and put on the tabletop. So that being said, let's get this video on a roll. Alright, so the very first step you need to do, of course, is to assemble your miniatures. As you can see, this came from the original box set from Necromunda Hive Secundus. It came with 6 Malstrain Genestealers, as well as 4 what are they called? Termites, what they're called? That's how you pronounce that word. So because you're going to basically sculpt them and assemble them any way you basically want to. As you can see, it's kind of with a generic kind of build for these guys, and once they're done being assembled, the next thing I got to do, of course, is to do a primer. Now, when it comes to priming, I usually don't show you this step whenever I actually do priming for my miniatures, and the reason why is because I usually just do the quick primer real fast and I move on. However, in order to paint these guys quickly as well as cheaply, we're actually going to be using some synthwave inspired color schemes, and we're using spray paints to actually paint most of the miniatures up for us. We're going to kind of do like a kind of Zenithal highlighting, kind of object source lighting type motif to these guys to make them look a little bit more bizarre, a little bit more alien in the depths of Necromunda. So the first thing we got to do, of course, is to prime the miniatures. In this case, I recommend using flat black primer on all over your miniatures. I like to use flat black primer by Rust-Oleum. It costs $3.99 at my local Walmart. I just do a quick once over of the entirety of the miniatures to get a good solid base coat all over the miniatures. Now, the reason why you want to do priming is because priming actually does 2 very important things. The first thing that priming does is that it helps your acrylic paints to adhere to the miniature as you are painting it. Unfortunately, if you were to take a regular acrylic and put it directly onto bare plastic, there's not enough surface tension to keep your acrylic paint on it. So the slightest bit of friction will cause the paint to rub off, which will absolutely ruin the finish of your miniature. So priming, of course, prevents that from happening. The second thing that priming also does too is actually has a large effect on the vibrancy of the colors that you use on your miniatures. Traditionally speaking, the more subdued or the darker paint tone you want to go with for your miniatures, you want to use a darker primer, whereas the more bright or vibrant color schemes, you want to use a lighter primer in order to do that. We're just using flat black on this one, and the reason why is because there's a lot of nooks and crannies and hard to reach places on these miniatures, so that way if we do miss anything with our spraying and with our painting, it just looks like we're just using shadows is all it looks like. Once, of course, this sets to dry, we move on to the rest of our spray painting to create our synthwave inspired look. Alright, so we're actually going to do a little bit of an object source lighting on this. What we're going to do is we're actually going to spray this in 2 different directions. We're going to do a Zenithal spray painting coming from a 45-degree angle from the right-hand side directly on these miniatures. And we're going to use Krylon satin finished Oxford blue. You can get this at your local Walmart for about $4.99. And we just spray the upper left-hand side of the miniature with this blue spray paint so that way it casts directly on top of them. At the same time, we're also going to spray paint the bottom left-hand corner as well with Krylon satin hunter green. You can get this at your local Walmart for about $4.99 as well. And we're going to do that to catch the shadow of where the blue areas are hitting. What this does, it creates a multitude of different colors that will kind of work together, especially when we start doing our highlighting on these miniatures, so that we have kind of like this kind of glowing, kind of off-world alien look with the paint job that we're doing for these miniatures. Alright, so the next spray paint we're going to do is using Magenta by Rust-Oleum. It also costs $3.99 as well. What we're going to do real quick is we're going to spray this directly from the top left-hand corner downward onto their sides. As you can see there, you see the bright magenta color kind of hitting from the left-hand side there. That's to create that object source lighting and kind of create that synthwave inspired look. At the same time, we're also going to spray from the opposite direction as well, from the bottom right-hand corner upwards, using some Silver Lilac by Rust-Oleum as well. This costs $3.99, and we do this to kind of add a little bit of a color variety. So we have some blues, some greens, some magentas, as well as some lilac color kind of going over the surface of the miniature. Makes it look very, very alien, and also makes it look kind of like the colors are kind of grading together through a gradient, and it looks really awesome as well. At the same time, we also saved ourselves a bunch of money by doing this. So So as you can see, we take the miniatures off of the paint stand, and this is what they will basically look like. They have a beautiful kind of gradient paint job, but to kind of bring all the characters together, all the colors together, we're actually going to do a quick dry brush real quick using Lilac Mist by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. We're just going to do a quick dry brushing all over the entirety of the miniature with this color. Now, the reason why dry brushing is such an effective method is because what ends up happening is that the raised surfaces of the miniature actually catch the pigment of the paint while leaving the darker colors in the recesses. It creates the illusion of depth on your miniature, as well at the same time brings out a lot of the highlights that we couldn't see earlier. Things like the texturing of the skin, the flesh, for example, of the claws, as well as the fold of the skin, the muscle fibers. So it does a really good job of bringing out a lot of those details we really couldn't see before. Now, whether you believe it or not, actually most of the miniature is actually painted just after we get done with the dry brushing step. In fact, what we need to start working now are on the finer details. So for these miniatures, I decided to use a really sharp contrasting colors to all the sprays that we used earlier, which of course is King's Yellow by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this yellow paint at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. Now, the reason why I decided to go with this is because I want to create like this kind of purplish, yellowish, glowing thing that was kind of running around in the depths of Hive Secundus. I mean, that's where my imagination went when I was thinking of actually painting these guys up. So because I decided to paint all these soft flesh as well as the eyes in that bright yellow color. So things like the tongues, for example, the little gaps between the chitinous armor that these guys have as well. The same thing with their tongues and their eyeballs. So that way they have this weird kind of alien glowing effect going on. That looks like that their inner flesh is glowing while their outer flesh is more subdued to make them blend in with the background. At least that's what the rationale I was trying to go with when I did this. The next detail we're going to paint real fast are on the flight stands of the termites. Now, the reason why I like to do this is because obviously when we're spraying our colors directly into the miniatures, that clear plastic, of course, is going to hit with the spray paint. So in order to help blend in those flight stands into the environment, I just picked that on 2 thin layers of Skyline by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 75 cents. It's the exact same color I used to rim the bases of all the miniatures in our studio's collection for whenever we do skirmish miniatures, because it's a nice kind of urban, kind of purple bluish gray that kind of blends in nicely with urban terrain. So we just did that real quick on the flight stands. You put 2 thin layers on that, so that way it kind of blends into the background to make it look like these things are kind of floating around. Now, as weird as it may sound, I actually started working on the bases on these miniatures because after I got done with the spraying, I thought, you know, these look really cool. I was really happy with the end results. I thought maybe I'll just start working on the basing so that way I could just wash these guys and be done with it. However, as I was going through the basing process, I thought they looked a little too flat and I wanted to add some more detail to these guys. We'll talk about that in a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the texturing of the bases that they have, these beautiful industrial style bases for all the miniatures. And we're going to pick that on 2 thin layers of Tuscan Teal by Apple Barrel Paint. It's a nice dark turquoise color, and the reason why I picked this is because, one, it contrasts nicely with the purples and the magentas that we're using for the aliens. And secondly, it kind of resembles the colors of the playmat for the Hive Secundus box set, so I thought that'd be kind of nice as well. So I just did 2 thin layers of that. The next step we gotta do, of course, is a dry brush. So the color I used for the dry brushing on the bases, I used Dutch Aqua by Folk Art. Once again, another beautiful product that costs 75 cents at your local Walmart. I just did a quick dusting all over the surface area of the bases. And as you can see, it brings a lot of those texturing and a lot of those designs that we couldn't see earlier. Things like the vents and the drains that are all over the bases, and it makes it really look really nice and make it pop as well. And once you get done with that dry brushing, we do one more dry brushing on top of that just to add a little bit more detail to it. And that last bit of detail we're going to do is we're going to do a quick dry brush with some Gunmetal Gray by Folk Art. It's a nice gunmetal color that you can get at your local Walmart for about 75 cents. And I did a quick dry brushing all over the bases in order to bring out some of those details. That way you can make it look like the base has been kind of weathered and worn. Maybe it's been, you know, brushed by caustic acids or maybe scraped up or something like that. Makes it look like the paint's been chipped and makes it look weathered and add a little bit more visual interest to the miniatures. And I was actually going to go to my oil washing stage right after this, but I was looking at these miniatures and I realized there's something missing on them that kind of bothered me. So I decided to actually do just a little bit more detail work before I started doing my oil wash. And in the end, I was really happy that I decided to make that decision. I decided to actually paint the detail of the spines along the back of the miniatures, as well as their claws, as well as like the little tentacle things from the termites as well. I picked that in 2 thin layers of pigment paint by Apple Barrel Paint, and it did a world of difference on these miniatures. It actually makes them look visually much more appealing than they did before. The nice thing about this is, of course, that because we have that bright kind of neon color, it clashes quite sharply with the really dark black that we have for the chitin on the back of their spines, as well as their talons, as well as their teeth. So I looked to look really cool and decided to use that color and then, you know, lighten up a little bit with a little bit of a dry brushing. And in order to do the dry brushing, I just did a quick dusting real fast of some pale gray by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 75 cents. It's a beautiful pale gray color, almost white. I just did a quick dry brushing all over the chitinous on the back, as well as the spines, as well as the claws, and everything else I just did in pigment paint. As you can see, it brings a lot of those textures you couldn't see before, like the individual fibers make up the blades, the individual sections of chitin plate that's on their backs. It brought a lot of those details we couldn't see before, and I'm really happy I decided to go back and actually fix that, because it makes these miniatures look a lot cooler. And once we're done with these dry brushing, the next thing I do, of course, is an oil wash. So usually when it comes to an oil wash, a lot of people like to use Army Painter Strong Tone in order to do this step, which is perfectly fine. Army Painter Strong Tone does a beautiful job, and it does exactly as advertised. The only problem though is that Army Painter Strong Tone costs $32 a can, whereas Minwax Polysheet Acrylic and Mission Oak costs about $6.99, and it does exactly the same thing. So you're doing the same exact effect, but with a cheaper product, and so because I did exactly that, I applied it like a wash all over the entirety of the miniatures, as well as the bases that they're standing on, so that way it gets directly into the texturing. The oil wash does a couple things. The first thing it obviously does is it darkens down the tones that we used earlier. And that's the reason why we use such bright colors in the very first couple steps of painting, because we know that the oil wash is going to darken down those values, and so that kind of makes all the colors blend together. The second thing it also does too is it smooths out the transitions between our dry brushing as well as our base coating. As you guys saw in the earlier slides, we did have a kind of like a pastel kind of chalky texture with our miniatures, and that's kind of a side effect of doing dry brushing, but by adding this oil wash into it, it smooths out those transitions by putting the colors together, and it creates a more organic looking highlight system for the miniatures. And the third thing the oil wash also does too is it seeps directly into the recesses of the miniatures and brings a lot of the details we couldn't see earlier. Things like the individual fold of the clothing, the flesh that they have, the gaps of the armor plating on their bodies, the ridges along their heads, all kinds of stuff, as well as the vents you can see on the venting details on the bases as well. Now we do need to let this stuff dry and cure for 24 hours because it does have polyurethane, which is going to have a nice hard exterior to protect your miniatures from weathering, chipping, as well as fading. So wait 24 hours for that to cure, and then ready to move on with the rest of the painting. So the next step, of course, we've got to rim the bases. So I put 2 thin coats of Skyline by Folk Art around the rims of the bases to give that grayish bluish color that I use for all of the skirmish miniatures that we use in the Studios collection. It just looks really nice, especially when you use it against, the Necromunda terrain that Iron Major makes on our channel, or his Mordheim terrain that we also use on this channel as well. And then, of course, the very next step, I didn't include this one in the slide because some people don't like to actually do this step, but I actually like my miniatures with a matte finish on it. When you decide to use Minwax Polysheet Acrylic, it does create a kind of high gloss sheen on your miniatures, a high gloss finish. I don't care for that too much, so I do use a can of Rust-Oleum, of Krylon matte finish, and I just spray it directly on top of the miniature. It meets down that sheen and makes it have a nice, beautiful matte finish as well. However, if you do like that high gloss, you could of course just skip this next step. But this is what the end result will look like, and it looks absolutely fantastic. Alright, once again, this is the end result that we showed you guys at the beginning of the video. As you can see, these guys are brought up to a beautiful tabletop standard. They look nice and alien. They look also very different in terms of the color schemes that they also have. That they're ready to bring pain and chaos into the depths of Hive Secundus. So now that we're going to talk about exactly how we paint up these miniatures using the Cheapskate method, let's go and talk about exactly what materials you need to buy from Army Painter as well as Citadel in order to achieve the exact same results we did, but using those name brand paints instead. Alright, so this is the shopping list that you'll need to buy from both Citadel as well as Army Painter to achieve the exact same results we did, but using name brand paints instead. You'll need to buy a can of Chaos Black Spray. It's going to cost you $17 to do your basing, as well as Eidolon Purple Clear, Vulpus Pink, as well as McCraig Blue Spray and Caliban Green Gray Spray. Those colors are going to cost you $7.80 a piece, except for Caliban Green and McCraig Blue. They're going to cost you $20 a piece as well. Thunderhawk Blue, you also need to get Thunderhawk Blue, Avalon Sunset, Decala Lilac, Eshin Gray. Those are going to cost you $4.55 for those colors. A pot of Lead Belcher is going to cost you $7.80 for that, as well as a pot of Rust Gray and Ultramon Gray, both those running you $4.55. You also might need a pot of Aethermatic Blue, which also costs $70.80 on top of that. If you want to do the oil wash, you'll need to buy a can of Army Painter Strong Tone, which costs $32, as well as a can of Mutatorium Varnish for $19.50 if you plan on doing a matte finish on your miniatures. Now, assuming that you're purchasing everything on this list for the very first time, you're talking about a grand total investment of $154.80 to paint your miniatures the way we did, but using Citadel as well as Army Painter. When you compare that with our Cheapskate total, which is a grand total of $39.93, you end up with a grand total savings of $114.87 being spared, which you could use to buy things like other miniatures or spend on whatever you want. It's up to you. Alright you guys, so there you have it. Are you strapped for cash? May I recommend switching to cheap craft paint to achieve the exact same result as using other name brand paints as well. Unfortunately, we are living in inflationary times, so being able to save money on the wargaming hobby is more important than ever before, and the number one way I can think of helping players save money is by using cheap craft paints. As you can see, I'm not the best miniature painter in the world, but my miniatures actually look pretty good, and I'm also saving a ton of money at doing it at the exact same time. So may I suggest using your craft paints in order to help you save money and your future budgets. So that's good news for you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. You guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blog.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this one, you guys. I will catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.